Welcome back. We're here talking about board portal services, and I want to move on to a subject which I think a lot of people will have some very important questions about, and that's security. Charlie, how secure are these services?
Remarkably secure. They're built with security at the base level. It's the most important thing that we provide to our customers, and they're considerably more secure than the alternative forms of distributing board materials.
What are the main security threats that people worry about, and how do you guard against them?
We construct it, as I say, with security absolutely the root of it. We spend a great deal of time and energy ensuring that security is at the highest possible levels. We also encourage our prospective clients, and in fact our existing clients, to undertake what we call penetration tests. So if they wish to try and penetrate the service, they're welcome to do so.
Okay. What happens if someone loses the iPad or loses their connection to it? Will whoever's finding that technology be able to pick it up and get in?
Absolutely not. It's absolutely designed so that is not going to be possible. So the data is stored on a device, iPad in this case, in a very secure encrypted container. And that requires passwords and authentications to get into it. And if the iPad is lost, the authentication is lost with it, and no one is able to access the information.
In terms of access at the client's end, that is presumably controlled in some way. Are there different levels of access? How do you restrict it at the client's end so that only the right people can get in and see the information necessary?
So it's done through what we call permissions. So the administrative staff of the client, of ABC PLC, predetermine who is going to create and provide the information, and we register that as a user. And then equally for the directors, they are listed as being members of individual boards or individual committees and are given permission, electronic permission, to receive those papers.
So different people within the company would have different levels of access,
absolutely,
depending on which committee they serve on, for example.
And it's for the client to determine that. So we very carefully map names 1 to X against boards and committees A to Z and give the appropriate permissions.
So what would happen when somebody left the business, when a director left the business, in terms of those permissions and the security that surrounds that?
Well, it happens day by day with our clients. They may not leave the business, they may move to a different part of the business or have a different role. Clearly the permissions are then updated. The administrative staff, the management of the company would tell us that Mr. or Miss X has been reassigned or removed or whatever else, and we simply update the permissions. And that again is part of the benefit of an electronic service, because they're no longer able to access the current or historical books that they may have seen. It's just taken away from them. They have no ability to get into them at all anymore.
Is security the thing that companies are most likely to ask you about when they're looking at implementing this kind of technology?
Well, if they don't, they should, frankly, because the security is the most important aspect of it, and they all do. I mean, let's be clear. It is the prime requirement of our service that it stays secure, and we go through various tests and checks with prospective clients and existing clients to greater degrees of depth. And in the end, we get to the chief information officer or the chief technology officer of the client, who has to feel comfortable that what we're doing is secure. And thankfully they do, because we explain it in detail. We demonstrate the failovers, the securities, the protocols, the authentications, and they find it very acceptable.
You said a moment ago that your system was more secure than the traditional paper-based approach. Can you explain a bit more about that?
Well, if you look at the traditional paper-based approach, I've got a pack of papers here. I've been given it by the company. Several things can happen to it. I can leave it in the back of the proverbial taxi, telephone box, etc. So that's obviously quite an easy thing to do. The second thing is, at the end of the meeting, something has to happen to that paper. Now, what should happen is they're shredded. The reality is that sometimes they are, sometimes they're not shredded. So there is always some form of risk in a paper-based product like that. Equally, other forms of electronic distribution, typically emails, are also typically not that secure. Non-executive directors don't normally have an email address of the ABC PLC that they sit on the board of. It's going to a Gmail account, a Hotmail account, and those are notoriously not secure.
Are there limits on what the users of the technology can do? For example, one problem I could foresee would be a director forwarding on information to a home email account or to someone else entirely. Are there controls on that kind of behaviour? We
have a series of security protocols and controls over each of our clients that can be flexed to the client's wishes. So, for example, you have the ability, companies have the ability to grant or deny permission for individual directors to be able to email certain aspects of their book, not the whole book, but certain aspects of it, to their own email account for historical records. Equally, there's a concept of printing. So we wish for it to be an electronic distribution, paperless distribution. Some people may wish to, for example, have the agenda printed. Some companies give that permission, some deny it.
Okay, so these are protocols that companies can set for themselves, and your system will work within that individual
Absolutely.
framework.
As part of our initial process implementation with them, we give them a checklist of questions designed around these type of aspects that they then give their views on, and we then implement it. And each client has a subtly different implementation. They're all slightly different one from the other.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Well, I think that's the end of this conversation about security, but we're going to move on next to talk about the simplicity of the system and how it works. But thank you very much, Charlie.